mic. Yeah. All I need is one mic. Yeah. All I need is one mic.
Hey everybody, welcome back to One Mic, where I watch shit so you don't have to. And today I'm here to talk about Season 3, Episode 4 of FX's Atlanta, entitled The Big Payback. The Big Payback title obviously refers to the payback that is the subject of this episode, that being reparations. I think it's kind of cool that we've had a couple of episodes now where we diverge away from the main cast and its storyline. At first I figured I would think that that's kind of that would annoy me because of, like, you know, we've spent so much time with the main cast and we love the main cast. I would think that, you know, already 50% of the way through, 50% of the episodes we've seen so far, we haven't seen the main cast at all. But I kind of like these almost like breaks in the story. Like, we have this ongoing story and now let's take a break to talk about reparations, like some kind of PBS special or something. And I think it's been pretty cool. I think they've told these stories in a very entertaining way. So this episode revolves around this guy named Marshall, who's played by Justin, did I write his name down? Bartha, yes. Who I'm sure we all know as Doug from the Hangover trilogy. I'm sure he's done other stuff, but I mean, he's Doug, right? Doug doesn't get too much time in the Hangover movies. I always thought that was interesting, especially the first one, because like Doug is like the focal point of the movie, but we barely see Doug at all in the movie. Well, Justin gets his time to show his acting chops a little bit in this episode, as he is the focal point of this episode in a very, very true way. And we follow Marshall throughout this experience of, I guess we'll say, learning about reparations. But Marshall, I want to talk about how we start off, because I think looking back on this episode after having watched it, it's interesting to think about how this episode starts off, which is Marshall's going to his daughter's mother's house to pick up his daughter. It seems like one of those, you know, mutual, I'm drawing a blank on the name now. It's like a word that starts with C. But one of those agreements where, you know, parents have these custody, boom. One of those custody agreements where, like, he maybe has his daughter on the weekends or something like that. And it was interesting watching that scene, because I'm watching the scene and I don't take anything from it. I'm just like, okay, this guy has some sort of agreement where he gets his daughter certain periods of time. And after his conversation with that guy, Ernest, at the end, that scene looks a little different to me, because I look at it now like that probably should have stood out to me, because that's a huge stereotype in the black community that, you know, that the fathers aren't around and that we all are in these like mutual custody agreements with mothers, and you got single mothers raising kids. Like, that's a big stereotype in the black community. If that had been a black character in a black family, I might have noticed it more. But for some reason, like with the white people, I was just kind of like, oh, okay. They just have that thing, because it's so normal to us that it doesn't even stand out, the fact that that's probably not as normal in the white community. And I think the show wanted us to have that feeling, you know, looking back, like, you know, we looked at something that is looked at in a stereotypical way as being commonplace in the black community, and we see white people doing it and we don't even think anything of it, when in reality, white people might have watched that episode and been like, oh wow, this guy doesn't have this guy's not with his kid's mother. So like, I don't know, I found that interesting, especially given the way everything with this Ernest character plays out. And I want to talk about that a little bit too, but we'll get to that when we get there. So let's see, what did I have next I want to discuss? So Marshall leaves the house and he hears over the radio about this court agreement for this guy who works for Tesla, and it's the exact idea of reparations. He finds out, well, the black guy finds out that this white guy who works for Tesla owned his family, and he wins this case to get some money, and Marshall blows it off. Not a big deal. He arrives at work and the white people are freaking out, and the black people are just having a good time. They're just like, yeah, like, well, like you see like some woman dancing in the background, and his white coworker is kind of freaking out, like, you know, this looks like this is gonna get out of hand. You should look into your own ancestry. This company could be in trouble, like all this kind of stuff. She's panicking, and Marshall's just like, it's not that big a deal. I think everything will be fine. This company can't afford to pay whoever. Everything's gonna be like totally blowing it off. Meanwhile, throughout the episode, by this point in the episode, he's gotten like 3 calls from an unknown number. So by this point, I'm thinking like, whoever this is that's calling him is probably somebody who's coming to him for reparations. And sure enough, he goes home and he hears a knock on the door while he's with his daughter, who who is fresh off of asking if they're racist, and he just blows it off. And it's a whole funny conversation, but. He's having dinner with his daughter, gets a knock on the door, and Shaniqua shows up. And she, like, barges in on some ghetto shit, which I thought was really funny. But it's, like, partially not that ghetto, because she's looking like, yo, this is my shit now. Like, your family owe my family. You owe me money. All this stuff is mine. And then I think, like, my favorite part of the episode, I don't know, this might be a stretch, but I thought it was a very subtle but still very funny moment, is when he yells at her and he finally gets her to leave and he slams the door. She goes, don't quit slamming my door, or something like that. From like outside, you can't see her or anything like that. I thought that was a really well done joke. So now Marshall goes back to work and he's, just trying to work his way through everything that he's going through. He's like really upset about Shaniqua, and he's in the bathroom and he sees a guy with a shirt that says, "I own slaves." And he goes back out and talks to the same coworker. And she's like, yeah, I guess instead of having to pay a restitution or whatever to the people whose family his family owned, they just wanted him to have to acknowledge it. So they said that 2 days a week he has to wear this "I own slave" shirt, and one of the days has to be Sunday, which I just thought was funny, because like, you know how black people we are about religion and shit. Like, Sundays is like a special day, and for him to have to wear this "I own slave" shirt on a Sunday is just, I feel like, for him, it's not that big a deal, but for the black people who made him do it, it's like super rewarding. But what I loved about this scene is at the end of it, the coworker goes, "I think he got off easy," which is an interesting statement, because on the face of things, let's say he owes $3 million, just like Shaniqua claims that Marshall owes her. Having to wear a T-shirt 2 days a week as opposed to paying $3 million is getting off easy. But it's still an interesting, it's an interesting outlook that I think the show is giving us, which is why I love this show so much, because it takes an episode that on its face is very simple, lighthearted, I think, kind of like, like a weird kind of version of like Get Out or something like that. Because I put in my notes, like, this has to be like a horror movie for white people. But that scene is a little different when you look at it like, this woman would rather admit that she owns slaves or that her family owns slaves than to just give black people whatever it is that they're owed. And I think like that, I love how that scene works in both of those ways. Like I said, the shirt is getting off easy compared to wearing $3 million. But when you are the white person in this situation, to think I'd rather admit to owning slaves than give black people what they're owed, I think it just speaks to the mentality. And that's one of the things that I loved about this episode. And one of the other things I loved about this episode is Marshall then goes directly from having a conversation with this woman to the break room where these two black guys talking. And he's waiting for them to leave, waiting for one to leave, and he asks to speak to the other. And he explains the situation. I got this woman coming after me. She claims I owe her reparations, yada, yada, yada. And the guy's like, you want my advice? I say apologize and pay her as much money as you can. And then it immediately like smash cuts to him just like, yeah, hey, so white people, what do you think I should do? Like, okay, the black guy told me I should actually pay what I owe. So let me just go find a white opinion that's going to validate how I already feel. And sure enough, the white guy is like, yeah, you got to fight it. I love that, because it just speaks to like Marshall comes across as a sensible guy throughout most of the episode, but that scene shows that he really is dealing with this the way any other white person would, which is the idea of like, yeah, you guys told me I should. The black guy said, they ask us, what do you want? How can we help you? The people who claim to be what's the word? I'm really drawing blank on words today. Like supporters. There's a common word for it, but they claim to be supporters of what we want to do, and they're like, how can we help? And the black guy's like, well, you can help by apologizing and paying what you owe. And he's like, yeah, nah, fuck that. let me go get some opinions that are just gonna gas me up to fight this, as opposed to tell me what I should be doing. and what black people actually want to receive. I thought that was a really funny scene as well. So Marshall leaves work, he heads home, and Shanique was outside. This motherfucker's barbecuing out there. And I love how he sees that shit. He don't even get out the car. He's like, he turns around, he starts to speed off. And for some reason, this one guy chases him, and dude is like mad fast because it seems like Marshall is flying, and this dude is like right on his tail before he gives up. It reminded me of Terminator 2, like watching the T-1000 like running after like this motorcycle and like keeping pace until eventually he just gives up. Actually, no, it was a car because he actually does catch up, but whatever. He catches up and then they cut him off. But yeah, it just reminded me of that. Like, man, this guy's really keeping pace with his speeding car. So Marshall decides, not decides. He was like, I can't go home. So he goes to a hotel. And at this hotel, he meets with this guy named Ernest. And Ernest is, if you remember, the guy from the boat scene at the very beginning of the first episode, which I had some comments on that video that were like, hey, you didn't talk about this scene. And I wanted to say, now that there's an opportunity to call back to that scene, that, I didn't speak on that scene because I didn't know enough about that story. I did read up on it, that everything that he was saying about that lake was true, or true as in like believed by that community, like that's a real thing. But, I didn't feel comfortable speaking about that like I did speaking about the story from, with the kid and the foster parents and all that kind of stuff. Like I was familiar with that, but I did think that was a great scene. I don't know if I didn't talk about it at all, or if I just didn't talk about how that story about that lake is true or believed to be true. But yeah, that was a great scene. But this guy Ernest is the same guy from that boat scene at the very beginning, and he is, and this is what I love about his name. He is earnest with Marshall. I love how Ernest, which is also the name for, Donald Glover's character, Earn, is a synonym for honest. And that's what you get out of Earn all the time, is like this almost kind of like emotionless honesty. And we get that from this Ernest too, who tells Marshall, again, a bunch of shit he probably doesn't want to hear. And he also makes a reference to the idea of Marshall's not wife, ex-wife. Well, we don't know the relationship. We call her his baby mama. Is in the same situation that is a very stereotypical one within the black community. And then Marshall's looking at his. Did I call him Mark earlier? Because I just watched Severance too, and Severance has a Mark, and I feel like I might have called him Mark many times in this video. I think I've stuck with Marshall mostly, but I might have slipped up once or twice. But Marshall's looking at Shaniqua's Instagram, and in the background we see Ernest kill himself and fall in the pool. And then like one of the waiters there is a black guy. He's just like, yeah, he's going to be the first of many. Or there's more where that came from, something to that effect. And then I thought the episode ended, but I stayed with it because I didn't see any credits or anything like that. And it went to commercial and it comes back and we see Marshall doing I guess doing the right thing. But I love the change in the power structure that we see here. Like we start off with this Mexican guy arriving at this restaurant, and he's in the back and he's in the kitchen, and Marshall is back there, and Marshall is a server at what appears to be a very high-end restaurant. They got, steaks and all that good stuff. And he goes out there. We find out that, he's taken this job as this waiter to pay his restitution to Shaniqua. And he goes out there to serve these people their meal, and we see that it's like almost all black people at this fancy steak restaurant. And I love the visual representation of a shift in the power dynamic. And it doesn't have to be a shift in the power dynamic in the sense of like, okay, now white people are being persecuted in the same way that black people are, but a shift in the power dynamic can still be something that's a little bit more balanced. Whereas like right now, if you go into a Ruth Chris or something like that, you're not going to see all black people. Like you might see a few, but right now the dynamic is that like these high-end restaurants is where you see all the white people at, and who are the people who work there? Mexicans, black people, quote unquote, lesser than or poor people. And I like the idea that now white people, even if they're not entirely within that space, they're at least partially in that space where it's like now you got the white folks, some white folks working in the back who are serving restaurants full of black people who now have this money to spend at these restaurants. And it doesn't have to be, like I said, a complete switch in the power structure, but it could at least be a little bit of a leveling out and a little bit of an evening out of how this works. And I liked seeing that at the end, that Marshall ultimately is, whether he wants to or not, doing the right thing, but it also results in a shift in this power dynamic, and we get to see a little bit more black people in these positions. I almost like to see a part 2 to this episode and see what the world is like. Have them do an episode of just what the world is like once reparations have been paid out to black people. So Donald, if you're watching this, maybe make that a season 4 episode where we see part 2 of the Big Payback, and we get a world where white folks have now paid out reparations. Black people have now received what they've owed. What does that world look like? You can have it, payment for that. Just have me appear on the show. I don't even need to speak a line. I'll take it. But yeah, this was a good one. This was an enjoyable one. Atlanta so far, I think, is one of those shows where, like, if you don't get an episode that completely blows your head off, you might go, oh, I don't know, that was just okay. But like, every episode of this show is so good and so in such great subtle ways. And I think that we should be a little bit more appreciative of this high quality level of television. And, even though this episode was not one of those ones where you could just dissect every little cool piece of it, it was still a really entertaining episode, and it still told a really entertaining and necessary story. So I will see you guys next week for episode 5. And until then, peace.